It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears.
Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we are talking about The Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry by C.M. Wagner.
Correct.
Would you like to do the plot or shall I?
Okay, so Deli is a young woman who has grown up with a drug addict mother and has made a variety of bad choices that have kept her poor. And her chance to escape the crushing poverty of her dead-end life is offered when she gets a job working as a bodyguard for as part of a team of bodyguards for a young lady. Her fellow bodyguards include handsome troll butch lesbian from upper class and trans old lady necromancer, girl who can turn into a pig, and a variety of other people. And she ends up getting involved in drug manufacturing and all sorts of other things. Also, she can set things on fire with her mind.
Yes. This book is taking place in magical Victorian England, where magic and technology are sort of coexisting and semi-penetrate each other. And that's I would say that that's pretty much it. It's a comedy. It is a rollicking mystery comedy kind of thing.
Yes.
Are there lesbians in this book?
Yes, not the main character, who is your classic disaster bi, but the love interest is very much a lesbian.
Yes. This is also a sort of a default bisexuality setting in that, although, which I actually want to talk about a little bit more, because although there are gender roles, they're not the same ones that we're used to, and it's pretty much accepted that you can marry gay people, or that gay people can marry each other or household each other without causing a scandal.
Yes.
And yes, and there are, as the title would suggest, there are wizards. There are definitely wizards. The author's website refers to themselves as a wizard author or a humble author for all your wizard needs. So yeah, no, very much wizards versus lesbians, and they are fighting. So
yes. I mean, the lesbians are also wizards.
Yes.
There's a lot of wizards in here.
Pretty much everybody in this book is a wizard. Well, no, 70% of our main cast are wizards. And so why should you read this book?
It's fun.
It is fun. It's a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. It's really entertaining. I thought that they did a good job. The author did a good job of making Deli somebody who you can totally understand how she has made such a disaster for life, both in terms of her background and also in terms of her current decisions. But despite that, she's not stupid. You can understand when she makes bad decisions, you go, yes, you and she both know that this is a bad decision and you understand why she is making it. But she's also competent enough that you understand how she has made it to her late 20s without just dying in a ditch. It's also, I think, it's a very accurate portrayal of what it is like to have an alcoholic, opiate-addicted mother.
Yes. And we were recording this episode on Mother's Day, so a happy Mother's Day to all who celebrate. I would say, so we've done a few books that have felt very sort of Pratchett-y. This is by far the most successful Pratchetting.
Yeah, you're right.
Of any of the ones we've done.
This is also, Leora had told me later, she was like, yeah, I kept thinking about recommending this to you and then hesitating because I know that you don't like anglophilia. But this one is sufficiently skeptical of many of the, of like the British class system that it does not feel excessively anglophilic.
Yeah, in fact, one of the major ways in which it reminds me of Terry, of Sir Terry's work, is the simultaneous grudging affection for the upper classes and deep skepticism of the class system.
Yes.
Which is very much a hallmark of his work and is also present here.
Yes.
And it's also quite funny, which is very hard to do. But at the same time has better character development than 99% of the serious stuff that we've done. The characters all feel very, very distinct from each other and have understandable motivations. And the plot ticks along. It doesn't drag.
It really doesn't. Yeah, the plot ticks along. And, the writing is fun. Like, it's clear that the author's having a ton of fun writing. And everything is channeled through Deli's eyes, and she does a good job of the narration of the setting captures the rhythms of Deli's speech without going overboard and making it just like impenetrably precious.
Yes, and Deli also code switches a lot because she is a street girl basically who spends a lot of time trying to, if not pass, then at least not embarrass herself in front of, ladies of fine quality. And so we get a very good sort of gradient of preciousness in the language.
Yes, and one of the things I want to talk about post-spoiler zone is the different ways that Deli code switches and positions herself vis-a-vis others.
Yes. As to why you shouldn't read it,
well, for one thing, it's a really accurate depiction of what it's like to be the child of an alcoholic and drug-addicted mother. And if, for example, your mother died of a drug overdose sometime in the last 6 months, you may find this to be a very distressing read at points.
Yes. This is one of those things where, like, it can be hard to, we say, why do we do content warnings? Here's another way in which this book is Pratchett-like. It is a very sort of lighthearted comedy book that has a lot of really heavy themes in it also. We can talk more about that post spoiler zone. In fact, I think I definitely want to. Yes.
But just to be warned, you will find that you may very well find this both affirming and yet also quite distressing at points.
Indeed. I don't think either of us had any idea going into it. And as I was going through reading it,
I did actually.
Okay,
I did, because Leora was like, just as a warning, you're going to find the whole plot with the mother very difficult. And I was like, thanks for the warning. And then I have to say, I found it significantly more difficult than I expected, because I'm used to reading books with difficult mothers. But the way that this handled, the author had a very deft touch, so that you could have the inherent humor of the situation while also it just being really evocative of certain things.
Yes, we will go into that in the spoiler zone.
Yes.
Apart from that very specific but very real issue,
animal death.
If we're doing content warnings, animal death, sort of coercive. Coercion via drug addiction,
Also just drug addiction in general. Murder. Necromancy.
the sort of violence that's inherent in the class system and in criminal enterprises. As for the book itself, this is one of those your mileage may vary things, because I've made a lot of. There's a couple of books that we've done where I'm like, hey, this is doing a very affected, silly kind of a prose style, and I don't think it's pulling it off. In this one, it's doing a very silly, affected prose style, and I do think it pulls it off.
Yes.
But if you may disagree, and like if in the first couple of pages you're like, oh boy, this is a lot, it does calm down a bit, so you might want to stick with it a little bit more just to see. But it's never going to be like. It's never going to stop making up the silly faux fancy words. So you're just going to have to be if that's going to bother you, then the book's going to bother you. But it didn't bother me.
Yes, I would say, and when I initially started it, I was like, oh, this book is going to annoy me so much. And then it calms down very quickly. And it establishes what it's doing, which is slightly different than what you might think it's doing for the first couple pages. So I would say that unless it is completely repulsive from the first few pages, give it until she lands the bodyguarding job, and if by that point you're still not on board, then probably you're never going to be.
Sure.
And that is fine.
By the same token, I really liked when it doesn't do it very often, but when she goes into like the deep patois of her background, I think that's handled like unusually well. I really like the sort of, because it's not any actual slang as far as I know, but it's very convincing.
Yes. So do we want to? Is there anything else that we want to say before we go into the spoiler zone?
I don't think so. I think. I should say also. I mentioned Terry Pratchett, but I got a big whack of Brian Jakes off of this as well. If you're into Redwall, you might. I
don't know, because Redwall is very invested in in like racializing the class system and upholding it.
This is particularly in the way that the prose and dialogue is handled, rather than
the prose and dialogue. Yes. I think if you were if you liked Redwall as a kid and then you grew up and went, the underlying value system here is really distressing. Also, there's not very many women and several of them die, like get fridged. Then you may enjoy this as something that sort of will appeal to the kid part of you. There's even a mouse, though the mouse is undead and very creepy. So
I mean, that reminded me more of The Death of Rats.
Yes. No, this is very much. This definitely strikes me as something that comes out of like a post-Pratchett fantasy world and is pulling off those influences better than many, as you said.
Agreed. But I think that's all I've got. Let's head off to the spoiler zone.
To the spoiler zone.
Spoiler zone.
So let's talk about the code switching and let's talk about the use of language in general here, because I think it's really interesting.
So our hero, whose name, by the way, this book also has great names.
It has fantastic names. Abstentia Doc.
Abstentia Doc made me just stop and like just really. I just really appreciated Abstentia Doc. What an excellent name for that character.
Right. Our heroine, Delaria Wells, who everybody calls Deli.
Yes. And various buttonses and mittenses.
Yes.
But yeah, so our hero was brought up at what's it called? Lice Town? Lice something?
Yeah, something like that.
It's Licecourt, and not spelled the way I thought it was either. The sort of the gutter of fantasy in London, and she speaks one way when she is, among people who she grew up with. She speaks another way when she is among sort of neutral people, and she speaks yet a third way when she's among upper class people who she's trying to either suck up to or just sort of exist with in the same space.
Yes. Or also, sometimes she leans into it to sort of simultaneously suck up to, but also annoy, which I really appreciate the way that, she will occasionally perform servility in a way that is designed to mildly get on their nerves, but leave her sufficient plausible deniability that they can still, they're not going to kick her when she's down.
Yes, that felt really, really real. Like the way that, like, she'll call somebody ma'am like 10 times in the same sentence and make up a sort of disgustificating style, overcorrection word. And who she's talking to will say, "That's not a word. Please don't call me ma'am." And she will ramp it up
Double
after
down
that
on
just
it.
to annoy
Yes.
just to annoy the person, which felt extremely true to life. There is a concept of rebellion by over servility or by servility in a way that doesn't actually accomplish what the person who's ordering you around is trying to do. And that's very much present here.
Yes. And that's one of the ways in which I think that she's, she's a really great character. And it's part, because again, she's such a disaster in so many ways, but she's also really canny and smart. And so, it ends up being that when she's doing something like that, you end up going, well, this may not be the absolute smartest decision, but I'm totally on board with you doing this because I agree. You shouldn't let these people completely boss you around.
And like, this is another thing that really impressed me about the book is that at no, like, particularly for a book like this, where it's like there's a sort of central murder mystery, conspiracy plot, she isn't dumber than the audience.
Right.
we're never ahead of her very much because, she figures things out really quickly. It's like there are moments when she's like, oh, I can't remember the name of this person who's the villain. And I'm like, oh, God, how long is this going to drag it out? And it turns out that it drags it out for 2 sentences. And then she remembers the name of
oh, yeah, that's right.
which I really appreciate as sort of the fake out of something that is going to annoy me and then doesn't.
Yes. Yes, exactly. And so that's, and occasionally she does something really dumb, like get really drunk at a bad time. And when she does that, because they've already established that she is fairly smart and competent, you go, yes, this is why your life is still a disaster. I mean, this plus the class system and general grinding poverty. But they do a good job of being like, okay, this is the kind of self-sabotage that you do when you're stuck anyway.
Yeah, no, self-sabotage is the word. And even though she doesn't say it to herself in those terms specifically, the book makes it very clear that that's what she's doing.
And she understands that that's what she's doing.
Yes. She's like, oh, I recognize there is, in fact, a specific point where she's like, oh, I recognize this behavior pattern that I'm about to do. Oh, well. Yeah. And then actually is able to pull up at the last minute and not do it. But, but
which I thought
she could very well have done it, So.
And I thought that did a good job of establishing that she must have done, similar things a lot in the past.
Exactly.
So I like that the book does a fairly good job of establishing how much self-sabotage she has done, in her previous almost 30 years of existence. But you're mostly part of the fun of this book is watching her pull herself out with only a little bit of backsliding of what has been a lifetime of, bad repeating patterns and self-sabotage. And so she doesn't do it very often, but the book does a good job of convincing you that she's done it a lot, which adds some dramatic tension. Like, you don't know how thoroughly she's going to be able to pull herself out, even though you know that probably there's going to be a happy ending. You don't know just how cringy it's going to be before you get to the happy ending.
Yes. Although, and honestly, the book doesn't, it didn't for me have that kind of cringe at any point. And that's another one's mileage may vary thing, but that cringe for me comes through a lot when characters are being dumber than they ought to be.
Right. And the thing, and the point where she's just gotten engaged and she gets completely smashed because she's got all these emotions about possibly escaping poverty, but now actually kind of liking the person that she's using to escape poverty and not sure. And worried that she's going to destroy it all. So of course she goes and gets really drunk.
I think that's a good pivot to talking about the relationship, which is sort of one of the major focuses of the book, and also one of the most interesting things about the book. Because we've had these cross-class relationships a lot before, right?
Yeah.
And the sort of, we've never had it from the perspective, which I think is, so we've had it like, the person from the underclass is like, in love with the person from the higher class, but, really doesn't like that they're in love with the person from the higher class, or the person from a higher class ends up treating them like shit by accident because of, class expectations and condescension. And we get it mostly from her perspective here, which is like, how can I actually figure out how I feel about this person, because, the overriding the change to my circumstances that getting with this person would be are so enormous that like,
right. And the fact, she sets out from the very beginning going, this could be, my way, if not out of poverty, at least to, some nice expensive jewelry. And then she starts to go, oh wow, this is my way out of poverty. And the entire time, she's also like, but part of why this is working as her way out of poverty is because this is somebody where there is some like chemistry and mutual attraction and, liking.
Yes. And it also helps that, Wen, is that her name?
Yeah.
Wen is like also like a cartoonishly good person.
Yes.
Which, sometimes that happens in life.
Well,
you meet Basil Staghair.
Right.
In the form of a giant lesbian, which like, who among us could not, dream of such a
Picture me as a child of 8 with my hand over my heart, next to Brian Jakes at the children's place. Basil Stag Hair was my favorite character, but even then I wondered why the Weasels and the Stoats never got to be the heroes. Later in life I figured out a little more, but it doesn't change the fact that that feeling was pure.
But I think that, there's some hints as to how Wynne got to be a cartoonishly good person. And part of it is that she's growing up in a society where she is so upper class. Everybody else you see who's part of the upper class is upper class but a little bit precarious about it.
Yes.
Upper class but they made all their money in trade, or upper class but, they're out of money, or whatever. And Wynne is so upper class that she just doesn't have to worry about any of this. Her father is the secretary to one of the most important people in the country. But also she's part of a different race, and this isn't made a big deal out of, but it does establish some of the ways in which, she's comes from a different culture. And so that gives her both complete insulation against the status insecurity, while also, I think, giving her some natural understanding of what it's like to be somewhat othered, even at the top part of society. So she's more sympathetic to things like, oh, by the way, upper class people generally don't like being asked these questions about money. You have to hint around and ask, and observe their status symbols. And it's like, oh, you had to do this, didn't you?
Yes. It's the vibe. Speaking of Pratchett, is sort of Sybil Rankin and Sam Vimes-y in that respect.
Right, where Sybil is so high up that she can marry Sam Vimes and nobody can say anything different, and also where Sybil, because she's fat and socially awkward, understands what it's like to be othered. So she's got a little bit of skepticism of the system that she is completely the beneficiary of.
Yes. Incidentally, this is the second book that this author has written in this world. Although this isn't a sequel situation. This book stands its own, and I haven't read the first one, but I was curious.
No, me neither.
Are there sequels to this one? But the first one, as far as I can tell from the plot summary, is about how Wynne's parents met. And
I'm gonna have to read that. Actually, I would totally read that.
It looks het, so it's not like a podcast candidate. But
I feel like this. I like this author enough that I will totally read her. Het story about.
Yes, that's called Unnatural Magic. If folks would like to check it out.
I somehow completely even missed that there was a book before this one.
But having said all of that, I think it's actually sort of also a your mileage may vary thing, because Wynne is quite condescending toward.
She is,
and it sort of works because Deli is also very conscious of using Wynne, and so neither of them are coming at this in a pure way, or in a perfect way, because that never happens ever.
Yeah, and it's very clear that part of the appeal that Deli holds for Wynne is that Wynne is politically very much invested in the idea of equality,
yes.
And so. So she likes that this person isn't from her class system, and that, and that clearly Deli holds a sort of exotic fascination for her.
Yes, 100%.
And
I would say also that how maternal Wynne becomes to Deli, and Deli's own mom issues are probably not unrelated either.
No, not at all, because there's all these moments where, Deli is like, it was so nice to just sit back and let Wynne take charge and pay for everything.
Or sit by my bedside and read me a story, or or bring me food, or it's like nobody's ever taken care of me, and now this person's taking care of me, but this is also my romantic partner. And I'm sure that this is something that they're going to have to continue to work on.
Right, no, I mean, I ended the book being like, I'm not 100% sure that this is going to lead to a long, happy marriage, but in both of but I am convinced that, this is a really good, that, why not? They might as well.
Yeah, no, exactly.
It's worth a shot.
Although I have to say I had similar feelings, and for the first time in ages, I felt moved to maybe write a bit of Deli/Doc fanfic.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, they have great chemistry.
Yeah, I was like, I think my personal tastes would be more, to be for somebody like Doc more than somebody like Wynn. So maybe I'll, and this prose style seems like it would be a lot of fun to try to emulate. So I'm putting that in the back of my mind as a project, maybe.
You absolutely should. I would enjoy reading that. And so I felt like this book could have tried to sell you on the relationship being 100% perfect, and it didn't. Like, occasionally it raises things that it doesn't 100% resolve. There's the mother issues thing. There's the fact that, there's still a little bit, Wynn is still a little bit condescending. And there's also, like, the moment where Wynn gets jealous, and she checks herself immediately and apologizes a bunch. But she still gets, like, jealous and suspicious. And
yeah, and, like...
and that's never completely
angry,
resolved.
Scary, jealous, and suspicious.
Right,
also.
Exactly. And then there's like this moment where I think she
and physically imposing.
Right, and also extremely wealthy, and like much, all the power definitely resides with her. And
right.
you can see her realize that and apologize, but like Deli is resentful about it, which for good reason, and they never really resolve it. I mean, it gets resolved as Wynn apologizes, and they both just have to hope it doesn't happen again.
And it probably will, and they'll probably have to work through it.
And they'll have to, exactly, they'll have to work through it. Like, this relationship does, the happy ending here is that they're going to go off and have adventures and give the relationship their best shot. But it's not, I like that it's not promising that that everything is going to be uncomplicated and perfect.
Yes, I agree. Yeah. I think that pretty much concludes my thoughts on the relationship part. But yeah, no, I thought it was very well handled.
So then let's talk about her friendship with Abstentia Doc, her frenemy-ship with Abstentia Doc.
Yes, I mean, honestly, like, I would nominate Wynn for best love interest because she's so, like, incredibly perfect, apart from the issues that we just talked about.
But Abstentia is definitely a
best frenemy candidate.
Best frenemy is definitely, our current front runner, I think, for best frenemy. And the fact that that's actually a great little moment where she's like, "How on earth did you learn to do magic?" And Deli is like, "Oh yeah, I was one of those scholarship students that Lord What's-His-Face
brought in specifically to prove that scholarship students weren't worthy of or couldn't be real wizards," which I thought was a fantastic and accurate touch.
Exactly. And the fact that, Deli made it all of a year and was clearly very good academically, but again, self-sabotage, got drunk in the library, which you absolutely know any other student at that school who got
would have gotten away with. Yeah.
Would have gotten a stern lecture and, that's it.
Right.
And she fought, and like this is
if clear that, this depending on their background,
right? If that, and clearly they'd just been waiting for an excuse to kick her out because she'd been doing well enough academically.
Yes, she had inconveniently held on for a year.
So, and so you can see sort of Abstentia grudgingly recognize that this person, despite only having 1 year of formal schooling, she doesn't... You can tell that she's very frustrated because Deli is so déclassé, and yet does seem to genuinely have the, like, intellectual chops to be, honestly, the most competent, at least in the bodyguarding phase.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a fun relationship.
It is. It really is. I also like, because this is, but incidentally, there are a bunch of like fun little things that I noticed that this book does, which are just like little techniques which sort of short circuit things that have annoyed me about a lot of the books that we've read.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, the book does sometimes it does like we have to recap the plot and stakes to make sure that everybody knows what's happening thing. But rather than just have the character monologue in her head about what's happening, which it felt like, just to pick an example out of the air, even though I knew the end, the character seemed to do that every couple of pages, even though the book is very short. In this one, she doesn't do it very often, but when she does do it, it's as the setup for a joke.
Yes.
So, like, it does the thing of reminding us what's going on so that the reader who might be not paying attention isn't lost, but it also doesn't bore the reader who is paying attention because it's a setup for a joke.
Yes.
And I really appreciate that. But the thing that I brought that up to bring up that the way that the sort of the bodyguard team is introduced, because Deli is barely paying attention and doesn't remember anybody's names, that we are introduced to them by their sort of extrinsic, like, first impression qualities first, so that we can get that kind of sense of who they are in our brain before then their names are re-added onto the pile and their biographical details are slowly added onto the pile. But the first impression you get of Abstentia is, oh, this person is like a cat.
Yes.
You know, which is a great, particularly for me, is a great way to hold on to the image of this sort of smug, self-satisfied character.
Yes.
And who is a dick to everybody. And
yes.
Then you get she's also like a the prissy straight A student kind of person, you know?
Yes. And then you've got your old necromancer lady. And that's again a great way of recapping everybody, is that you've got Deli desperately trying to remember everybody's name, and the sweet old necromancer lady ostentatiously working every bit of hers and her daughter's name into
that was
the
so
conversation.
Good.
That was so good, and it made her so endearing. Like, it made the necromancer lady so endearing, which is great. Like, I'd be inclined to like her anyway, just because she's like an old trans lady who's extremely sweet, but also a necromancer.
I mean, you mentioned that I hadn't clocked that she was trans.
No, it's great because she says early on, and it's clear that this is also something that she wants to let people know early on, so that they can get their reactions out of the way. Where she talks about, oh, well, I always knew that I was never going to be able to have children, the traditional way. So I always dreamed of being householder to some handsome man and adopting a gajillion children. And then later, when she talks about getting into necromancy or body science,
yes.
She says, oh, well, I was my mother took me to a body scientist lady to deal with some, developing issues I was having with my body. And once she straightened those out, I was so impressed with body science that I decided to become one myself.
Oh, right. Because I just thought of that as with my being infertile. But clearly, if the body scientist had straightened out that specific thing, then she would have been able to have kids. So
right. Right. The thing is that infertility isn't the sort of thing you always know you have usually.
Yeah,
but,
as a impressionable child, yes.
Right, but if your dream is to marry a man and have a lot of children, and you know that you're never going to have those children through your own body, that to me that suggests transness, as does hitting puberty and needing to see the necromancer.
Yes, I agreed, and also it also helps to explain like her taste in adopted children.
Right, we're all of her adopted children are sort of gender nonconforming in one way or another.
Yes, to the point of being a were-pig in one case.
Yes. See, this is another great example also. Her daughter's name, Ermintrude Totham.
Yes, a fantastic name for a were-pig who wears a lot of frilly skirts.
So
yes.
Also, I do want to note that the love interest's full name, she goes by Win, but her full name is Winither Canalum Winserai, which again, great name.
Yes, indeed.
Winifred.
Yeah, we talked about sort of anglophilia, quote unquote, in the first one. This book is very good at presenting the most charming parts of that kind of, of that milieu.
Right, and because it's presenting it as a joke, that's also, I think, something that makes it more palatable for those of us who are, anglophilia skeptics.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's talk about the the mouse for a second.
Yes, let's talk about the dead mouse, which that's another example of, it starts out as a joke, and by the end you're like, no, actually I'm somewhat emotionally invested in this old necromancer man who like has escaped hell to inhabit a undead mouse. Yes.
The moment for me when that flipped over is one of the best scenes in the book, which is when Deli finds that her mother has left the hospital again and is like, tearing back through the city looking, fearing the worst, and comes back to find her mother having tea with Mrs. Totham, and also that the undead mouse has has inexplicably developed a crush on her mom and is staring up at her with his little eye sockets glowing pink instead of red because he, little hearts, going around his head. That was the moment where I was like, okay.
and Deli, being, very, being a really acute observer of social situations, immediately picks this up and is like, wait, if this is a human man inhabiting this mouse, what are you doing?
Get off her thigh this instant.
Get off her thigh this instant.
Yeah. No, and it's like, and that also, reinforces, like, and I don't know if we want to get into this now, but like the way in which Deli feels responsible for her mother.
Yes.
And for protecting her mother and mothering her mother, essentially. Mm-hmm. Her mother who had her at the age of 14 or something. And even though she, it's like one of those, even though her mother has given her absolutely no reason to care for her.
Yes, except for like the 6-month period where she had been, she dried out in jail, and there's the 6-month period before she goes back to, hang on a second.
Yeah.
Honey, can you please get Anshul? Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay, so what I was saying is, yes, other than the 6-month period where her mother had, when she was like 9, where her mother had been dried out in jail and gets out of jail and is, makes a stab at being a decent mother before she immediately falls back into alcohol. And I love, this is not even subtle of being about opiate addiction. It's synthetic laudanum.
Yeah, no, it's straight up opiate addiction. Yeah.
Right, like it's straight up OxyContin.
I mean, which is incidentally inappropriate.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I will note, incidentally, I know the author is dead and all, but I think that it is possible that one of the reasons why this author is handling the, colonial England era more thoughtfully than many is that she lived in China for many years, and I believe her husband is Chinese. And that may give you a different perspective on, say, the use of opiates in England.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I have to make an Opium Wars jingle now. Okay.
Yes, you absolutely have to make an Opium Wars jingle.
Something, something silver, something, something tea, something, something opium, unequal treaty. Something, something trading ports, foreign jurisdiction. One empire at its peak, the other in remission.
But yeah, no, exactly. Like it is both period appropriate, but also it, like the fact that there's this new drip on the market that's like, oh, that's like newly virulent. It's like, oh, that's OxyContin hitting the market when previously it was all, Vicodin and Percocet.
Right. Yeah. Or any number of other, that's crack hitting the market or whatever. But yeah, no.
Right. But the fact that it is synthetic laudanum, the fact that it's synthetic laudanum and just like, it's like, it's clearly opiates. They make you sleepy and happy.
Yeah, no, it's texturally opiates.
Right.
And like, it's also synthetic opiates that have been stepped on and, cut with whatever, and it's killing people,
Yeah, exactly. So, which again, and part of this, now that we're talking about the mom, is that the happy ending for Deli with her mother is that she gets enough money and she marries into enough money that she can pack her mother off to a rehab place. But again, the book doesn't resolve the fact that her mother's almost certainly going to check herself out and go on another bender, and Deli's just going to have to keep dealing with this until her mother dies.
Yes.
And this is made textual, where everybody keeps telling her, "We know that this is your dream. Sure, give it a try, but if she doesn't want it, you can't force her to clean up." And this just isn't resolved, and I like that it isn't resolved because, there's only two ways that this gets resolved. One is that her mother has a change of heart and actually tries to pull herself out of it, which does not seem in character for her. And the other is that eventually she's going to have an overdose and die.
Yeah, no, that's 100%. Like, this book's... I really enjoyed the happy ending of this book because it doesn't cut any corners, even though it sets up very well, like, the adventures that we could have with this set of characters in the future, because she's going to go off and be a sort of lady detective now.
She's going to be a lady muckraking journalist.
Yes. It is like, yes, you've sent your mother away, but as we've established, she's probably going to get bored of the countryside and fall off the wagon and come back and fuck up your life again. And also, we've established the problems that her and Wynn are almost certainly going to have. Also, Wynn has a TBI. And, that doesn't go away. And you're going to have to deal with that. That sort of, the sort of metaphor of resurrection there is, Wynn is not going to be precisely the same person. Having gone through that, and you're gonna have to deal with that. And it's like she had some problems with temper and impulse control before, and it's like the book acknowledges that. It's like Wynn says, "I'm having a hard time remembering things now," there's a lot of like, no, obviously everything isn't resolved because nothing is ever really resolved, but it doesn't feel that idea doesn't feel out of place in the larger milieu, Right.
And the thing is that there's a sort of acknowledgement in this book that when you have, when you come from that kind of background, like, when you're coming from a background of poverty and addiction, and you get your fairy tale ending, that the best, the closest you're ever going to get to a happy ending is stopping the story at a high point. At a hopeful point. That I like that the book doesn't, to me at least, the book seems very aware of all the problems that it raises and refuses and declines to resolve, because it makes the ending seem less pat, but also while still being optimistic.
I agree. I
do want to say, returning to the mother thing, that it's, the scene where she can't tell if her mother's asleep or has stopped breathing entirely, and just has this panic and shakes her awake, and goes, wait, she can't be dying now, not while I'm right here watching over her, was a just really well done scene. Like, all of the scenes with Deli and her mother are mildly painful but really well done. Mm-hmm. But that one was like, the author, either the author has personal experience or the author has really done their research.
Yes, or cares about somebody who has had personal experience with this, or etc.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's coming from either very good research or, listening to somebody who's had that experience.
Yeah, no, my experience reading that, as I think I mentioned to you, was, Alexis.
The fact, and also the ways in which her mother has flashes of genuine affection, but it is clear that even her genuine affection towards Deli is being weaponized in the pursuit of getting her what she wants.
Yes. I mean,
Deli knows this and can feel herself falling for it anyway.
Yeah, it's like the way that she sees her mother simpering and sucking up to the people who can get her what she needs, and immediately recognizes the same behavior in herself and is equally disgusted by it. but
Yeah.
continues to do it because what else are you going to do?
Right, exactly.
You know? It's very good. Yeah, no, like her frustrated love and hatred for her mother, and her frustrated love and hatred for herself, and
Yeah.
scrabbling for sympathy, for like understanding, and patience, and not finding it mostly.
Yeah.
All seemed very well observed.
Right. There's the moment where she finds herself wishing her mother would just die and, get off, like, stop being a headache for her. And then there's that and then she feels sort of horrified about it. And again, that also doesn't resolve. Like, the book could have just killed her mother off, and that would have, made the ending much more neat. And I like that it didn't do that.
Yeah. Agreed.
Nor does it have her mother even trying to kick the addiction. It just has her mother being packed off to rehab in the hopes that she will. Like...
Yeah, no, at no point does her mother ever express any desire to clean up.
Uh-huh.
I mean, which may be preferable to her lying about it.
Yeah.
Depending on your perspective. But
yeah.
No, it's clear that her mom's life is her life, And I also really appreciated that, the scene that we got where they give Deli the drug and then snap her out of it. There's a little bit of, sort of magic that feels like cheating in there, but it's felt like, and if you've ever like been on post-surgery painkillers, the description of what that felt like and her understanding of why you might want to spend your life like that.
Yes.
Which,
and then she gets snapped out of it where, she goes through opiate withdrawal in like 5 minutes.
Right.
And that's where she has her reasoning of, oh, this is what's driving my mother to keep taking this.
Yeah. And it's like, it gives her the understanding and maybe a little bit of empathy, but not, forgiveness, certainly,
Right.
It's just like, well, maybe this helps me understand a little bit why she loves this more than me.
Right. Exactly.
Maybe it's not a fault in me. Maybe it's the way the drug is,
And also the way that, her life is. Because,
exactly,
there's also this sort of where she, all the trauma that she hasn't been thinking about immediately comes to mind. And so you get like, and her mother is awful. And at the same time, it's easy to feel some compassion for her mother because her mother had her when she was 14. Like that, that her mother's, it's not like her mother's life has, was easy ever.
Yes.
Happy Mother's Day, everybody.
Do you have any?
No.
I don't want to change the subject.
No.
Yeah.
We're ready to move on. I think we've said
Cool.
everything we need to say about that. Why don't we talk about her? Do we want to talk about her 2 flings with random guys who are of her class?
Yeah, I did. First of all, because it's like, speaking of award nominations, the fact that we get 2 very decent men, who she either fucks or has fucked, and it's like, particularly, I mean, the footman seems like such a bit character, but I really appreciated him being there because, if you're looking at it from, say, Wynn's perspective, it's like, why would you go and fuck this random dude, in the middle of this? But I think that scene does an absolutely excellent job of getting into sort of the social dynamics of why you would want to, why it might be actually useful and helpful for you to do that, then why this man isn't taking advantage of her,
right.
Under the circumstances.
Right, like it ends up being this very sweet moment. And part of it is also, she's, you get this moment where Deli has been sort of consistently alienated by everyone around her who's of a different class. And she has this guy who's also kind of a different class. I mean, he's, in service.
Yes.
But they both understand what it is like to be surrounded by people who don't see you as fully human. And so it is just this, chance for them to have this, human moment together where they can both be like, yeah, this sucks.
Yeah, no, I agreed completely. And like also the funny little twist that he's in the dumps because he has a crush on his master who's about to get married.
Well, and it's kind of implied that he's had a thing with his master.
Yeah, exactly.
And has now, that it's not just a crush. Like, he was his master's side piece, and now he's getting dumped because his master needs to marry money.
Yeah. And so they can bond over that. It's sort of, if this wasn't a default bisexual world, this would be very, Willa-Willem solidarity plus fucking moment.
Yes. And, well, again, it sort of works as that this is one of these things where you have a default bisexual world, but they use other things to highlight queerness. And often in these books, it's been race, but in this one, it's class.
Yes. Agreed. And it's like, yeah, cool. Like it's the setting is making a very, it's not trying to do any sleight of hand. It's like, we're doing this in a setting where homophobia isn't a thing because we're not dealing with that.
We just don't want to deal with homophobia. But all of the gay relationships are cross-class.
Exactly.
And all of the straight relationships are in class. Mm-hmm. The marriage, Deli's hookups.
That is so true. I hadn't noticed that. But yeah, you're absolutely right.
And then meanwhile, this, the footman and and his master are both men, and Deli's
the actor.
The actor Deli and the actor are different genders,
mm-hmm.
but also versus Deli and Wynn cross class.
Right.
And
whereas Doc's suitors are, appropriately high class men who would not think of
exactly
taking her for a gallop, as the saying goes.
Yes, exactly. And even even when there's this moment where Deli is bonding with this random clerk, which she's running her scam game, and she's bonding with this random clerk, and it's about how the guy that he has a crush on is with somebody who's upper class, has escaped into the upper class, and Deli and the ex that Deli is remembering did the same thing of dumping Deli to escape into the upper class. So that's
really good. Yeah.
Right. It's just it's a really deft, subtle thing that does a good job of making this about queerness, even in a default, and about the sort of struggles and alienation you can experience being queer in a heterosexual society, despite this being a default bisexual world. Yes.
I think that I would have liked to know more about how that actually works. But I imagine that may have been covered in a little bit more detail, like the householding thing versus marriage and what that implies.
Right.
Whether householding is a gay category and marriage is a straight category, whether they coexist or not. I didn't really get a sense of that.
It's definitely it's householding is the general category because Mrs. Totham refers to her householder.
Okay, but if Mrs. Dockett is trans, surely then the distinction is about childbearing. Householding's a kind of legal adoption for unions that don't bear fruits. Or children that aren't from your womb. That's what I'm going with.
And what it strikes me as is that this is a world with two different gender systems. There's householder, householdee, and then there's also male and female. And you almost get the impression that this is a society which has transitioned at some point in the fairly recent past, because all of the old aristocracy still does these things like secluding their women, and everyone else is like, yes, only the upper class still cares about these old gender roles. Now we have a new gender role of the householder, householdee, which seems to often still be male and female, but doesn't have to be.
Yeah, that would also explain why there are things like, the bathing houses are gender segregated, which makes less sense in a sort of default bisexual setting. But if that dates from a period where, gender roles were more clearly defined, then that adds up. Yeah, I think you're right. This is a society where things have changed quite recently, and maybe in fact during the period when Wynn's parents were recording. So maybe. So
I guess we'll just have to read Wynn's parents' book and find out.
Exactly. But yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. shall I do a few minor notes?
Yeah,
that I like?
let's do some minor notes.
Here's a bunch more minor notes. This time I won't mention goats.
One of the things that I appreciate about the humor in this book is that there were jokes, but they'd also, I think that an underrated, or certainly something that I haven't seen done as much is, and this is actually something that Unwieldy Creatures was quite good at, is presenting an absurd situation entirely straight, and letting you just appreciate how stupid the situation is without really calling attention to it. Like, all right, I'm going to impress the girlfriend that I am trying to, or I'm going to impress the woman that I'm courting with how good a person I am by suggesting that we clean up a room for, the aged grandma to live in our meth lab.
Right. Yes.
It's very subtle. And it's
in our meth lab, and also for her necromantic mouse. And there can be a basket for buttons.
Exactly.
The necromantic mouse.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed, speaking of jokes, of the moment where they're interrogating their would-be kidnapper, and the would-be kidnapper is like, Lord fucked his name, and Wynne goes, of the Pembleton fucked his names? And
yes.
Because
nobody else because that's a high class specific joke.
That's a high class specific joke. And so this moment where Deli and the man who tried to kidnap Deli are sort of united in this, what are you?
Class solidarity.
Class solidarity. And it's also just nice because it's a moment where finally Wynne gets to be the one who's awkward and out of her element. Because for so much of this, she's able to skate on being so high class that even when she's out of her element, she just is able to be the classy one anyway, but not when it's, a midnight interrogation.
I appreciated the coffee shop porn.
Yes. Oh, the coffee shop porn. I want to go to that coffee shop now.
Yes.
Would we have been more forgiving of Sappho's bar and grill if it had been Sappho's coffee shop? Probably.
I loved we got an undoing of A Million Tiny Buttons, which is of course,
a classic
from the classic tweet and the second page of the Lesbian Romance Handbook.
Yep.
And a ruthless U-hauling as well.
Yes.
So, bases covered on that front.
Indeed.
Actually, here's a sort of a thing that, I didn't have very many quibbles with this book, but here was one. The way that alcohol is treated. Because I think it's odd to me that Deli isn't an alcoholic.
I mean, she's not an alcoholic, but she has a serious drinking problem.
Yeah, I guess. It's mentioned that she started drinking gin when she was 8.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess sort of the way. This is another thing where it's we're seeing a problem that isn't going to be solved, and we're just sort of getting a sense of it. Wynne drinks a lot less and is not nearly as much of a drinker as Deli, and gets angry when Deli gets drunk. Well, angry.
She doesn't get angry. She just gets very condescending about it.
Gets very condescending and and maternal about it. But she doesn't seem to really have a problem with not drinking for a few weeks while they're on the trip, and maybe that's just because that would have been too much to handle along with everything else.
Yeah, the impression I got is that if Deli had enough money, she'd become an alcoholic, but because Deli's money goes first to keeping herself alive and second to keeping her mother alive, that the project of keeping her mother alive from her mother from dying of her own alcoholism and drug addiction has kept Deli drinks as a coping mechanism, but just hasn't had an opportunity to become a full-fledged alcoholic. Because
that's actually a really solid point. That's maybe the best thing that her mother has done for her, in fact.
Right. And that this cautionary example is not enough to stop Deli from drinking when it's obviously a bad idea. But that Deli, because one of the things I really like about Deli is that she's really a survivor, and that includes. So, when she makes bad decisions, it's often the coping mechanisms that are necessary to keep surviving. and that she's able to set those coping mechanisms aside when it's that, or be cursed with mostly on the face pustules, and then homelessness and then death.
I think it's to go back to the title drop. It's like, it's the Ruthless Lady's Guide to Wizardry, because Dilly really is ruthless in the sense that her own survival and then her mother's survival are absolutely her top priorities over everything else, which is why she's still alive.
Yes.
And relatively functional at the age of, having been brought up the way that she was.
Yes, and her mother is not committed to staying alive in the same way, which is why, which I feel like is part of why and or how her mother has become an addict. And Deli just seems like, whether it's a matter of just her wiring, or maybe she just also inherited fewer addiction genes from her deadbeat father, who she never met. But I genuinely think it's also just that the project of survival has kept her, from spending. It keeps her from spending the money she doesn't have on alcohol, even as what money any disposable or can probably be made disposable income has been going to alcohol. But she does pay her rent first, or at least pays her rent late enough, like on time enough that so she's not getting kicked out of her room drinking. If she'd been an alcoholic, you wouldn't get this book.
Yes, exactly. Magic in this world. I mean, since this book is like focused on class, the idea is that like people have magical talent, but it's kind of, magic in this world is kind of like having access to STEM education, as far as I can tell.
Right, and it's kind of like having mathematical talent, or being a naturally good reader or something like that, where some people have so little talent in it that it might as well be a mild handicap, a mild disability, and some people are so brilliant, so naturally talented at it that even without education they can get by. And the majority of the people in the world can do at least a little bit of it if they bother to learn, and if they specialize in it.
Yes, and also it's not hereditary. Although being brought up with, in money helps a lot, because if you do have even the littlest bit of talent, it's going to get, nurtured and fostered and educated. Because Wynn's parents don't seem to be mages, at least. Not. I mean, I actually don't know if that's true.
I think her father might be.
Yeah.
Because her father is like best friends with and secretary to the Lord High Mage or whatever. So.
True.
But the thing is, like, Deli's mother has absolutely no magical talent whatsoever, and Deli has.
Right. God knows who her father was.
Right, right, but but nobody's ever like, oh, I guess your father must have been a mage. It's just like, oh, you were born with this talent that can be taught a little bit, but you were just naturally born talented. So it's somebody who has the kind of talent that can shine through even a mostly lack of education.
Right, and it's clear that it's not separate from her book smarts, in quotes, because when she does get a chance to, when Doc is trying to actually teach her, she's like, oh, okay, actually, this is starting to make sense to me.
Right.
So, the whole, like, fire witchery is uncontrolled and wild thing is, like, a class distinction for, like, clever, poor people, kind of.
Right. A specific.
Which isn't actually true, because nobody has bothered to actually look into it because they're poor.
Right, exactly. But again, it works really well as the metaphor also, because it's this thing that could be her ticket out, but also in her current situation can hurt her as much as it helps her, setting like where a guy is groping her. She loses her previous waitressing job because a guy gropes her and she sets his beard on fire, which also very much works for being really smart.
Yes. No, I agree.
So I thought this was a really fun book that is way smarter than it looks at first appearance.
Speaking of condescension, we're a pair of podcast literary critics who still judge books by their covers, literally.
Yeah, no, it's one of those, sort of sly things where as you go through it, it continues to dawn on you how well considered and complex it actually is.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that. I will say, however, I would recommend reading this book rather than listening to the audiobook.
Oh no.
It's not because the audiobook, I mean, there are like two ways that you could have approached the audiobook, right? Mm-hmm. You could go like hell for leather. I'm going to do all the accents really hard, or you could go the way that this performer did it, which is to not really attempt to do any accents, except bizarrely giving the footman a black voice. And
that seems like a poor choice, but okay.
And gives like Win an English accent, kind of, but only Win. And I think and I understand why you might choose to be, a little bit circumspect about it, because it could end up being a clown show if you try to do the, but I think this book would particularly, you can't do a Win without giving her a ridiculous upper class voice.
Right.
Because otherwise she's just saying what at the end of every sentence, like she was Stone Cold Steve Austin. And that doesn't scan. So I found the book was good enough that it overcame that for me. And the performer is skilled in terms of like, audiobooks reading. It's just, I would probably go with reading the book rather than listening to it.
I thought that, doing the voices in my head worked quite well. So,
yes, I think that certainly the voices in your head are probably going to be better than the voices that the audiobook narrator attempted here. But yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. Unless you have anything. Anything else
thank you to whoever it was who recommended this.
Yeah, it was really good. Like it's definitely one of my favorite books that we've done so far, and I think I will go ahead and read the other book by this author under my own time.
Yeah. So all right, and then next week next episode we're doing the short fiction roundup again.
Yes, we are. So we'll do that, and until then, bye folks.
Bye.